The next area in the hospital to be built out once we get the seal ward up and running is our phocids, or our seals, that Kathy talked about, the different species of seals that we see here on Cape Cod. Also with a large quarantine area. This will be our admitting and quarantine area in our two larger pools for isolation and further medical care. This is what the artist's conception will have of one of those large rooms. And you can see here that the doctor very wisely standing behind the barrier because you don't want to get bit. And the seals, we do have several local migratory populations and the international visitors. We also see out-of-habitat species such as bearded seals and hooded seals sometimes come down to Cape Cod beaches. The seals that we're dealing with are not part of threatened species, but they are protected through the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and so of course all this is done with federal authorization. And the human impact on seals can also be significant. These are two different animals, and I'm sorry for the graphic nature of this, but this shows a seal that had an entanglement. It had a monofilament line that was removed from around its neck, and in the whales and in the turtles you can see how this creates a very serious wound. This had gone through the skin and into the blubber layer, but this animal was sufficiently healthy to be released. It would have been a little bit better to have taken this animal into captivity for anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks to ensure that these wounds didn't become further infected and that the release of that animal would be appropriate. At the time, there was nowhere for this animal to go. This was a few years ago on Martha's Vineyard. And then months later, the same animal, this was a different animal, the same species, was found dead. But you can see the necrosis in the tissue here. This is very consistent with a wound that had not been treated appropriately, probably caused by some sort of entanglement that caused the death of this animal. So the conservation has to work with some of these things are certainly our problems. The seals in One Health, this has been a disease process that I've been studying in seals probably for about 8 years now because I've seen an increased incidence. I'm now being called up to Maine. I got my Maine veterinary license so that I can go up and work with the stranding groups up there because they've been dealing with this condition of a middle ear infection or otitis media. And if you have children, you're well acquainted with otitis media or middle ear infections, right? Middle ear infections are the single most common reason that kids go to see a doctor. And so this is an illness that occurs not only in people but in seals. And we've been tracking the different kinds of bacteria that are associated with this. To orient you here, it's a little bit light in the room, but this is a CT, a computerized tomography scan of the skull of a seal. Here's his breathing tube in, and these are the ear bulla, the areas that cup the ears. And this one is filled with fluid, and this is filled with air. Okay, air is black on radiograph, so this is a nice normal ear on the left, and this is full of fluid in here, and actually pus, and that represents an infected ear. So that seal here has otitis media. The One Health concept of seals is also important from epidemic surveillance. If you've heard of influenza, you probably did that. Right now we're still in the middle of an H1N1 epidemic, but there are several animals in the wild that are sensitive to influenza. Birds you've heard about, pigs you've heard about. If you do anything with lab animals, you've heard that ferrets are very susceptible to the flu. Well, seals get influenza as well, and they can act as sentinels for this disease. But I wanted to talk about middle ear infections and show how these all come together to illustrate this concept of One Health. So we have animal health. So we have clinical patient. We have a patient in the hospital and it's got an otitis media, all right? But up here in Provincetown, we have groups that are studying the environment and the environmental health, and they're looking at bacteria that might be occurring in the water columns, in the near shore areas. And they may notice an increase in the coliform bacteria, which may come from agricultural sources, runoff sources, flooding, or human activities. And we also know from the human health aspect that otitis media is a very common disease in kids. And one of the things that we've seen in seals, because their ears have valves on them to prevent water from getting down into the ears, it also prevents anything from getting out of the ears once an infection has occurred. And this means the infections tend to become deep-seated and involve the bones of the skull. And now you have a much more serious disease on your hand. And this condition is called